Comprehensive records on the latest Buddha's life and times are documented in various historical texts and in a number of different languages. They include the Lalita Vistara, the Buddha Charita, Mahavastu, and Nidana-katha. And we can get some additional details on Siddhartha's biography from the Jatakas. The Jatakas being the hundreds of mythic tales that account for the Buddha's previous incarnations on Earth. And we can also garner a few mythic tidbits from the voluminous discourses of the Pali Canon, known as the suttas, or in Sanskrit, sutras. And lastly, a relatively late biographical profile is recorded in the Book of Zambasta from Central Asia, in an Iranian language known as Khotanese. Of all these informative archives, historians tend to cite a Mahayanist version of the tale most often, the Lalita Vistara, largely on account of its old age and mythic details. Being Mahayanist in origin, it comes from the northern reaches of lands of the Buddha, and it's thought to date from around the turn of the 1st century, if not earlier, so 400 or 500 years after the supposed life and times of the Buddha. But another old and equally complete biography was recorded by a celebrated monk by the name of Ashvaghosha around 50 BC, about the same time. This being the Buddha Charita, which is in fact also of northern origin. But the Buddha Charita was eventually translated into Pali, the language of Pali, and was therefore integrated into the Pali Canon while circulating around the island of Sri Lanka 2,000 years ago or more. So Theravadan schools of Buddhism on the island of Ceylon prefer this version of the tale, along with a smattering of supplemental details on the sage's life from the Majjhima Nikaya and Mahavagga texts of the Pali Canon, which were penned around the 2nd to 3rd centuries AD. That Mahayanists of Northern Asia and Theravadan schools of Buddhism in tropical Asia conserved agreeable accounts on the Buddha's life, as do other versions from distant regions of the world. There's ample reason to believe that the story predates the development of doctrinal schisms that arose almost immediately after the dissemination of Siddhartha's miraculous story. And this is helpful, since the lack of contradictions between so many sources in so many languages actually gives us some confidence that we are dealing with an original and historically reliable version of the tale. Most of the larger biographies highlight a uniform sequence of 4 critical events or stages in the Buddha's lifetime. Beginning first with the Buddha's immaculate conception and miraculous birth to a quasi-divine queen on earth by the name of Maya-Devi in the Sal forests of Lumbini. India in antiquity, but the site is now part of southern Nepal. The prince's dreamy entry into the natural world is soon followed by an accounting of his adolescence as a popular and handsome, robust, up-and-coming aristocrat who decides, in any case, to abandon the luxuries and wealth of his father's palace to follow the life of a forest-dwelling seeker, whose focused aim is to pursue a deeper understanding of the causes of suffering and mortality that faced his family and fellow members of his tribe, the Shakya clan. The Buddha is often referred to as the Shakya Muni because he becomes a sage of the Shakya clan. After learning some important lessons in his spiritual quest, Siddhartha eventually attains spiritual enlightenment, which accounts for the second critical milestone of a Buddha. After this, the Buddha pursues a long and influential stretch of time, almost 50 years, wandering the Gangetic plains of India to share his insights into the mysterious meaning of life and the sources of humanity's endless sufferings. And then, in the fourth and final stage of a Buddha's life, the tired old pilgrim lays his body down in a lotus grove, where his spirit leaves his body and transcends the endless urgings of the ever-seductive wheel of life once and for all. Once Siddhartha has attained the stature, then, of an immortal god of gods, he is released from his bondage to the world of phenomenology and will never return again to the earth as a living creature. But his words and his ideas, which are referred to as dharma, truth, or doctrine, were committed to memory and script by his disciples and followers, and recorded to become the ageless religious doctrine that ensures the eventual welfare of his followers. The final stage of a Buddha's life is referred to as parinirvana, which, in Siddhartha's case, occurs only 60 miles removed from his place of birth. Although every known version of this famous tale differs in detail, primarily by accentuating this or that mythic scene or mythic motif, the gist of the tale is pretty much the same in all accounts. And just as importantly, I think it is fair to say that these narratives cannot be considered by any stretch an historical or even legendary account of a mortal man. Each and every version of the tale is mythic in scope from beginning to end, and presented as such with a mind to convey the same theological and metaphysical ideas that had always occupied the thoughts and minds of earlier Indo-Aryan mythographers, Brahmanic peoples for the most part. Yet, as fantastic and extraordinary as this tale may be, Buddhist monks and their congregants throughout the ages have naturally accepted the story of Siddhartha as a matter of historical fact, and conventionally recognize the original narrator of this fabulous yarn as the Buddha himself. In fact, the most comprehensive versions of the story are usually introduced to the reader in the form of an autobiographical sermon that is presented by the Buddha himself, usually in the presence of a congregation of lotus-seated bodhisattvas on the Buddha's yonder shores of bliss. In this light, I find it quite curious that most historians approach the tale of Siddhartha Gautama, as do the Buddha's monks, by assuming that we are dealing with a highly accomplished spiritualist in Indian history, as opposed to a mythic figure. This seems peculiar to me because the Buddha's biographies are no more believable as historical fact, as are the biographies of his Brahmanic contemporaries, such as the human avatars of Vishnu, Krishna, Rama, Kamsa, among others. And very few, if any historians, would ever attempt to make historical sense out of the lies of those guys. The Sanskrit rendering of Siddhartha's life story in the Lalita Vistara was supposedly recorded while the Buddha was still interacting with his close associates at Shravasti. But in all candor, we are obviously thrust into the memorable world of Vedic mythology in the prologue to the text. To make my point, let me just quote a portion of the introduction to the Lalita Vistara from an early translation of the text by Rajendra Lal Mitra. And I quote, "The sage of the Shakya clan narrated the story of his attainment of enlightenment to a throng of people in the garden of Anathapindika at Shravasti. In the company of thousands of Aryans, bodhisattvas and Buddhas, all absorbed in the depths of samadhi, yogic trance, all of whom were refulgent in the understanding of the awakened sage of the Shakyans, that worthy one who remains unattached to worldly possessions as water to a lotus leaf, the all-controlling charioteer and teacher of the gods and of men, the one who made himself manifest and spread himself far and wide into the world, the dispenser of the draught of immortality, the light of knowledge with a stainless body, and the vanquisher of the demon Namuchi. The Buddha's entourage asked the Enlightened One to recount the tale of his attainment to Buddhahood so as to spread the great vehicle of divine being to the people of Shravasti. Thus the bright sages illuminated the grove of Jetas by their sheer beauty, and they each were filled with a great delight and joy, as they all raised flowers in ecstasy to receive the Buddha's blessed discourse." Unquote. In these opening passages to the Lalita Vistara, the Buddha exhibits all the standard attributes of a Vedic sky god as he prepares to deliver his sermon to a throng of Aryans. The Buddha is likened here to a cosmic charioteer, a purveyor of the world, a dispenser of the elixir of immortality, or indeed as a pure lotus leaf that is untainted by the mire of material existence. The Buddha makes reference here to his former battles with a Vedic dragon, known in days of yore as Namuchi, this being an ancient serpent demon whose defeat was formerly accomplished by Vedic Indra, the father of the Vedic pantheon, who throws thunderbolts at this uncooperative dragon. All of these symbolic motifs applied originally to the plant god known as Soma during prehistoric time periods. And the symbolic importance of the lotus in this context is further accentuated by the actions and the gestures of the Buddha's Aryan devotees at the end of the scene, whom express their reverence by uplifting flowers of ecstasy to the sage in unison upon their arrival to hear his sermon. The scene takes place in the celestial realms of Tusita heaven, a well-known, a very popular heavenly paradise in both Buddhist and Brahmanic mythology that is typically only accessible through meditation or divine providence. This paradise was named in honor of a beautiful and pleasant lotus nymph by the name of Felicity, which is expressed in Sanskrit as Tusita. The setting is generic in type and usually portrayed in the arts as a riverbank filled with groves of lotus flowers. Here a host of devoted bodhisattvas, that is to say, Buddhas to be, bodhisattva means awakened beings, that await their next descent to earth to occupy lotus thrones and surround their golden-bodied master to hear sermons on the Buddha's Dharma, and also to lead humanity away from their sufferings and delusions. In Buddhist tradition, Tusita heaven is recognized as a celestial paradise in which all future Buddhas abide before their final descent to earth. In this case, the bodhisattva relinquishes his lotus throne and lotus diadem to a highly meritorious awakened being by the name of Maitreya, the nominal equivalent to the Vedic sun god Mitra. Maitreya will be the next Buddha in waiting that will follow in the footsteps of his divine benefactor, who is at this point getting ready to descend to earth to live out his final life. Again, from the Lalita Vistara, we hear, as Tusita's bodhisattva readied himself to appear on earth for the salvation of the world, he placed his silky turban on the head of the bodhisattva Maitreya before leaving his heavenly paradise, such that another Buddha might be born to earth in the distant future. And upon seeking the advice of his devotees as to what specific form he should take in his final descent to earth, and as to which specific location might prove most auspicious, various bodhisattvas and various gods recommended that he make his descent in the name and form of Brahma, the creator, while others opined that he would be better suited to become Maheshvara, Shiva, the destroyer, or perhaps Chandra, the moon god, if not Surya, the sun, or perhaps a serpent king, or why not the vehicle of Vishnu, the golden eagle known as Garuda. After considering these possible options, the Bodhisattva decided to be born as the son of a righteous king by the name of Shuddhodana, and to assume all the qualities in this life of a Chakravartin, a turner of the cosmic wheel, so he might turn the wheel of Brahma during his next life on earth. He would prosper in a kingdom where gardens were filled with flowers, where tanks were filled with millions of lotuses, and where inexhaustible supplies of ghee, honey, oil, and molasses are available to a nation that is devoted to the Lord of religion. While many modern commentators interpret the Bodhisattva's decision to descend to earth as a human being as, let's say, a mythic cover for a man with historical stature in the past, this perspective is actually more axiomatic than it is pragmatic. This is because his symbolic attributes, which we explored in detail in our video on Buddhist symbolism, are perfectly consistent with the prince's biographical details and records. And I think you will soon agree that this is not a human history, but the profile of a cosmic man, a human avatar that seeks entry into paradise and that seeks the stature of not just a god, but of a god of the gods. Readers of the Lalita Vistara are transported immediately into the domains of myth when the heavenly bodhisattva begins his descent to earth as a young prince. To accomplish this feat, the future Buddha takes the curious form of a lotus-white elephant to make his descent to earth. This heavenly beast descends and then deposits the seed of his own divine being inside the body of a beautiful queen in the palaces of Kapilavastu on the Gangetic plains of India. The queen is known as Maya-Devi, a Sanskrit name that translates as goddess of material creation. So his birth is going to be something that's quite extraordinary. This queen receives the stimulating essence of the white elephant while she is dreaming one night, and she becomes aware that something very special has happened to her body. The episode proceeds as thus. The lotus nymphs of Tusita heaven were given the task of deciding upon the most appropriate womb in which the bodhisattva might be conceived. So they descended to the city of Kapilavastu, wherein they found a most fortunate woman to serve as the awakened being's mother. Her name was Maya-Devi, and she possessed many physical qualities that surpassed the beauty and the charm of even the lotus nymphs. Her noble face was golden and possessed the qualities of the moon in the sky and the radiant sun. In her eyes rested the glory of the lotus flower, and her teeth bore the luster of the sky. Slender is her waist, the devas opined, like a bow, and swelling are her sides without depression. Verily, she is a goddess manifest, and no other. So, not a bad first start at life for the prince of the Shakya clan. Now, it is by no mere coincidence that the name of Siddhartha's mother, Maya, is an archaic Sanskrit term that means the creative powers of various Vedic and classical Brahmanic gods and goddesses. In early Aryan mythology, the powers of Maya are wielded by serpent demons in the rivers of the Punjab, but also by Brahma the universal creator, by the sun god Vishnu, and or Vishnu's consort, Sri Lakshmi, and Shiva's consort, Parvati. They are all wielders of Maya. Nor is it an accident that Maya-Devi exhibits all the standard attributes of India's archetypal goddesses of living creation, these being basically lotus flower features. For she is golden in color and bears a moon-like face and lotus eyes. Or more to the point, the Buddha Charita describes Maya specifically as having the general aspect of Vishnu's consort and female identity, and that would be Sri Lakshmi, also known as Padma, literally the lotus lady. In preparation for the Bodhisattva's final descent, the lotus nymphs of Tusita heaven shower Maya-Devi on earth with a rain of flowers before they return to the heavens to announce their discovery of an appropriate room for the next Buddha, while announcing with enthusiasm the anticipated birth of the child in quote-unquote the mansions of Maya. The Bodhisattva has assumed, as we noted, the fabulous form of a white elephant with a red head and 6 tusks, so a very strange elephant, in which guise he descends to earth to penetrate the right side of Queen Maya while she lays slumbering in the king's palace. As that 6-tusker filled the goddess with a vigorous essence, as they say, that was extracted from a celestial flower, this essence representing the seed of creation, the goddess experiences a sweet dream that sends wonderful sensations throughout her body and her mind. As the text notes, on that night when the Bodhisattva entered the womb of his mother, a stalk arose from the water below the earth, and penetrating through 68 hundreds of thousands of yojanas of the great earth, that stalk bore a lotus high up in the region of Brahma. None, however, saw that lotus except 100,000 Brahmin chanters of the region. In that lotus has been deposited the essence of the 3,000 of regions, their radiance and their sap. Mahabrahma placed the essence of the flower in a vase made of lapis lazuli and brought it before the presence of the Bodhisattva, who accepted the vessel and drank its contents as a favor to Mahabrahma. There was not a living being who could drink that vigorous essence and remain at ease, except the next coming Bodhisattva, who had acquired the fullness of all the stages of Bodhisattva perfection. And so, not unlike the seed of the Hindu gods Agni, Soma, and Shiva, which was traditionally identified as soma, the drink in early Vedic mythology, we are informed that most living beings would find the lotus nectar of the elephant to be excessively potent to ingest. Yet, the Bodhisattva shares the virtues of his lotus blossom with a community of Aryans in Tusita heaven before partaking of the plant's sap himself. To quote from the Lalita Vistara, the lotus essence of vigor became manifest for the meritorious. That substance, refulgent in virtue, had been for 7 nights prepared in the regions of Brahma, and had been brought to the Bodhisattva by the mighty Brahma himself. The vigor of virtue of many kalpas was deposited in that essence, and by drinking it, the thought and understanding of man becomes purified. So surely the spirit of Soma was alive and well during the authorship of the Lalita Vistara. And apparently, Soma was responsible for the conception of the Buddha by Maya-Devi. For the celestial elephant then plucked the same white lotus from the heavens and penetrated the womb of his earthly mother. Now, in mythic terms, one might interpret the sage's immaculate conception in terms of a lotus shoot penetrating his mother, the earth, the ground. as this would be an interpretive proposal in the context of Vedic mythology. The tale informs us, however, that auspicious signs were observed throughout Kapilavastu when the womb of Maya-Devi received the potent sap of the sacred lotus, because blind subjects regained their sight, hunchbacks were made straight, and the lame were given to walk again. This wondrous turn of events was not unique to the era of the Buddha, and that the exact same miraculous incidents take place when sages drank soma in the Chandogya Upanishad and the 68th hymn of the Rig Veda's 8th chapter, a prehistoric text. And all the while, lotus flowers of many colors blossomed throughout the queen's kingdom as her subjects rejoiced in knowing that the final incarnation of a bodhisattva would soon lead to the cessation of humanity's suffering. The Lalita Vistara's biographical accounts follow the biographical version of Ashvaghosha, author of the Buddha Charita, quite closely. For he describes Kapilavastu as a land where sages drank soma and meditated on the absolute. And when they say absolute, they're referring to Brahman, and this is philosophically equivalent to the Buddha. And it's here that Maya-Devi gestates the seed of the cosmic elephant, as they say, like an oil in a vessel, for 10 months. So Maya eventually gives birth to Siddhartha Gautama in a grove of sal trees that was located on the marshy plains of Lumbini. Sal trees being the largest trees, some of the largest trees of Asian forests, with very thick trunks, thick and straight trunks. And she gave birth to Siddhartha during the time of year in which lotus tanks are filling with budding flowers. The arrival of her divine child is extraordinary in all respects, as we are told that lions convened upon the spot to witness the bodhisattva's appearance, along with troops of golden lotus nymphs, numerous serpent damsels, and herds of white and yellow elephants. As Maya held herself upright on the branch of a sal tree to give birth to her divine son, some versions actually referring to this tree as either a mango or a jambu tree, both fruit trees of Asia, the moon, the stars, and chariots of the sun, as they say, ceased their movements in the heavens. The scene is presumably portrayed by images of a buxom goddess that dangles her body from trees on the portals of Sanchi's ancient stupas in central India. Yet strangely, the Golden Prince does not exit Maya's uterus, but takes an alternative route by issuing miraculously from the right side of Maya's body. A strange parturition, to be sure, but one that causes no feelings of pain to his mother and leaves no residues of afterbirth. To quote the Mahavastu, his body is untouched by the impurities of the womb. Even like the exquisite lotus that is born in the mud of pools, beautiful as the newly risen sun, he excels the immortals in Brahma's heaven. Early reliefs at Sanchi portray Maya giving birth to her son while dangling from a sal tree in a variety of contexts, one of which has her standing here firmly upon a lotus stalk. As sky gods scattered flowers across the heavens, the Vedic gods Indra and Brahma received the divine child in his human form with conjoined hands. And the newborn baby stepped forward precociously with both feet bearing the marks, they say, of a lotus flower and a Brahma wheel. According to the Buddha Charita, he appeared like a young sun come down to earth, and despite his dazzling brilliance, when gazed at, he held all eyes like the moon. For the glowing radiance of his limbs, he eclipsed the world like a sun. the radiance of the lamps, and beauteous with the hue of precious gold, he illumined all the quarters of space. He, who is like the constellation of the 7 sages, walked 7 steps with such firmness that the feet were lifted up unwavering and straight, and that the strides were long and set down firmly. As young Siddhartha paced triumphantly toward the 4 quarters of space, lotus flowers erupted along the 7 footsteps of all 4 paths. Siddhartha proceeded to stride into the world with the vigor of a world conqueror, a jina, while proclaiming that this life, his final incarnation, was destined to bring an end to all birth, decay, death, and pain. The birth of a golden child to King Shuddhodana and Maya-Devi naturally inspired excitement among the people of Kapilavastu. The king's subjects gathered about the child to admire his golden, perfect body and immediately recognized that their prince was none other than a Devati Deva, a veritable god of gods, a title that was formerly shared by Brahma in the Upanishads, as well as contemporaneous creator spirits of Hindu tradition, such as Vishnu and Shiva. A wandering ascetic and advisor to the king, known as Kaladeva Tusita, was drawn to the scene by divine providence and predicted that the newborn prince would attain nirvana by accomplishing 6 years of ascetic practices. Or, according to a Tibetan biographical source, it was prophesied that he would achieve nirvana by drinking a cup of amrita, this being a word for soma, the elixir of immortality. With tears in his eyes, Kaladeva expressed a bitter and sweet remorse for having come upon this wondrous child at such an old age, knowing surely that he would die before he could witness the rising of this so-called Buddha sun. Or according to the book of Zambasta, Tusita proclaims, "Would that my life should have lasted so long. He would give us to drink the nectar, which will remove my woes. He would convey me across the sea, where are the whirlpools of birth, the waves of death. He would convey us across to the further shore on a ship." Since this famous sage was described as a knower of the Vedas in these texts, he was certainly aware that the original nectar-bearing boat of truth for his Aryan ancestors was none other than the soma plant, which is deemed in Vedic verses as a metaphorical ship of truth. Another interesting aspect of the Buddha's birth, which has been noted by various commentators, is that the nativity story of Prince Siddhartha essentially recapitulates the birth of Indra to Aditi, a goddess, an earth goddess, in prehistoric Vedic hymns. We describe in our video on Soma of the Vedas, for example, how this Vedic storm god also emerged from the side of his mother, Aditi, at birth. And like the Buddha, like Siddhartha, young Indra strode into the world as a golden scion of a solar race of sky gods that had vegetative attributes. And that both Indra and the Bodhisattva experienced no pain and produced no afterbirth during parturition. Both children were born with a precocity that is uncharacteristic of a mere mortal, and that Indra immediately walked away from the site of his birth to conquer the dragons of delusion, the Vritras, in the rivers of the Punjab, while, in comparison, Siddhartha takes a series of 7 steps that provoke the emergence of lotus shoots, while announcing that his incarnation would be his final entry into the wheel of life. Another interesting mythical relationship that is shared by Indra and Siddhartha is the impact these divine children would have on the lives of their mothers. Although mothers of all Buddhas never suffer pain or complications during the birthing process, they are, in fact, by tradition, destined to die within 7 days of giving birth to a future Buddha. Hence, Maya-Devi perishes only 7 days after giving birth to Siddhartha, and then ascends to Tusita heaven as a reward for her meritorious karma. This same sacrificial act parallels the former fate of Indra's mother in the Rig Veda, interestingly, insofar as Aditi, although an eternal creatrix, perishes as well soon after she gives birth to her brilliant child, Indra. So it would seem that early Buddhist mythographers felt no shame whatsoever in totally plagiarizing a tale from their Vedic records and then refashioning this tale to disguise it as their very own, the story of the Buddha. When we recall that Indra was often identified as an aspect, however, of the plant god Soma, well, that would also identify the Buddha, by association, with the immortalizing plant of the Vedic pantheon, Soma. And as we now know, that plant has been identified by me as the sacred lotus. Before Maya-Devi perishes, she is given a brief period of time to enjoy and admire the fruits of her labors. The appearance of the golden child attracts the attention of many gods and goddesses in the region, including 2 dragons by the names of Nanda and Upananda, who approach the child to bathe him in heavenly waters. The so-called half-bodied serpents, meaning serpents that have a human torso in the Buddha Charita, pour 2 streams of water, one hot and the other cold, so as to essentially acknowledge the entry of a god into the material and delusional realms of conditions and phenomenology on earth. And then, immediately thereafter, 2 Vedic devas, as opposed to 2 Vedic asuras, namely Brahma and Indra, consummate the babe's appearance with a baptismal rite. Quoting from the Lalita Vistara, the scene is described as such. Indra and Brahma, the guardians of regions, and children of the sky gods, the Devaputras, by the hundreds of thousands who had arrived there, bathed the newborn bodhisattva with scented water and well-blown flowers, and sprinkled the same about him. The bodhisattva, seated on the noble lotus, beheld the 4 quarters. He beheld it with the sight of a lion, with the sight of a cosmic person, a veritable Mahapurusha. When King Shuddhodana takes a moment to admire the brilliance of his newborn child, he turns directly to Tusita and asks, "Is this young shoot of my family just sprung up, fated to wither without flowering?" To which the wise man answered, "Siddhartha will surely become a mighty boat of knowledge and will ferry his disciples across the ocean of suffering. And he will accomplish this feat by means of a drink from the flowing stream of this most excellent law." One can only assume that this expression is a veiled reference to Soma, since Shuddhodana himself, the king, is recognized as both an adept in Vedic lore and a drinker of Soma. Indeed, the Buddha Charita describes Siddhartha's father as one who, and I quote, drank Soma as enjoined by the Vedas and observed in his heart the self-produced bliss of religious tranquility. Meanwhile, a class of underworld aquatic spirits, the yakshas, continue to surround the infant with golden lotuses in hand. Showers of perfumed water fell upon blue and pink lotuses that surrounded the prince, as the divine child continued to display the typical attributes of a Vedic sky god. Quoting the Lalita Vistara, "When the great charioteer, full of the light of the full moon, was awake, the king envisaged the child as a body radiant as fire, more resplendent than the sun, more glorious as the full moon. And then he said to the sage Tusita, 'O sage, Behold the adored of men and gods, lustrous as the finest gold. So once again, to equate the Buddha with three sources of light, the sun, moon, and fire, takes us back to descriptions of Brahman in the Upanishads and to Agni and Soma in the Vedas.